Jamal Carter was born into a world where the color of his skin dictated the boundaries of his dreams. The Deep South was a place of rich soil and richer traditions, but for a black boy like him, opportunity was always scarce. His grandfather, Elijah Carter, had spent his life toiling under the hot sun, working the fields that belonged to white landowners who never paid him what he deserved. "Land is power, son," Elijah would say, his voice heavy with the weight of lost dreams. "If you own the land, no one can tell you where to stand." Jamal held on to those words like a prophecy. He spent his childhood running barefoot through the cotton fields, watching how his grandfather tilled the soil with care. He saw the way the white farmers treated their black workers, as if they were invisible, disposable. Jamal promised himself he would be different. He would own his own land one day. But in a town where racism ran deep, dreams like his were laughed at. "Ain't no black man ever gonna own land in this town, boy." A white farmer named Clyde Jackson sneered when he overheard Jamal talking about his future. The other men in the general store laughed along, their voices echoing in Jamal's ears. "You better stick to picking cotton, son. It's all you're good for." Jamal clenched his fists but didn't say a word. He had learned early that arguing with ignorance was a waste of time. Instead, he worked harder. He studied modern farming techniques, learned about irrigation, and absorbed everything his grandfather taught him about the land. He had one thing they didn't: determination. When Jamal turned 18, he knew that staying in town meant being trapped. There were no loans for black men, no opportunities, no future. So he did the only thing he could. He left. For the next 10 years, Jamal traveled across the country, working on farms from Texas to California. He learned about advanced agricultural techniques, sustainable farming, and modern technology that could revolutionize farming. While white farmers in his hometown still relied on outdated methods, Jamal was evolving. But he never forgot his grandfather's words. One day, when he had saved enough, he returned home. But when he stepped off the bus, he realized something shocking. The same men who had once laughed at him were now struggling. Clyde Jackson's farm was in foreclosure. The banks had taken back acres of land from white farmers who had refused to modernize. Equipment sat rusting in the fields. The economy had shifted, and the men who had once looked down on him were now desperate. And Jamal? He had cash in hand and knowledge they had ignored for decades. The Jackson farm was the first to go on the market. Clyde Jackson, now an old man, sat in the bank with his head in his hands. Jamal walked in and took a seat. "I want to buy the Jackson farm." The banker, an older white man, raised an eyebrow. "Jamal, do you have collateral? A cosigner?" Jamal pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk. "I have savings, business plans, and government grants lined up. I don't need a cosigner. I came prepared." The banker flipped through the papers, clearly surprised. He had expected Jamal to fail before he even walked through the door. But Jamal had spent years preparing for this moment. 1 week later, Jamal Carter became the official owner of 50 acres of farmland. The town buzzed with gossip. A black man bought Jackson's land? How? But that was just the beginning. Jamal didn't just buy land. He transformed it. He introduced advanced irrigation, sustainable crop rotation, and modern machinery. Within a year, his farm produced more than any of his neighbors. Other black farmers in the area, inspired by Jamal's success, approached him for guidance. He started a co-op, pooling resources to help other minority farmers gain access to better equipment and fair deals. Meanwhile, the same farmers who had laughed at him were still struggling. Their farms were failing, buried under debt. And one by one, their land started going up for sale. Jamal was ready. Over the next 5 years, Jamal bought out 5 more farms. One day, Jamal sat across from Thomas Miller, a farmer who had once thrown racial slurs at him when he was a kid. Miller's farm was drowning in unpaid loans. The only person willing to buy it? Jamal. Miller looked at the paperwork, his hands trembling. "Damn shame," he muttered. I never thought I'd see the day a Carter would own my land." Jamal leaned forward. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd be begging me to buy it." The deal was signed. Another farm. Another victory. By the time Jamal reached his 40s, he was the largest landowner in the county. His farms weren't just successful, they were revolutionary. His methods boosted yields, provided jobs, and brought economic stability to a region that desperately needed it. One day, a local journalist asked him, "Jamal, what do you think of all those people who once doubted you?" He smiled. "They used to laugh at me. Now they work for me." Jamal Carter's story became legendary. He mentored young Black farmers, ensuring future generations had opportunities. He bought out banks that once denied him loans, turning them into institutions that supported minority-owned businesses. He rewrote the rules, not just for himself, but for every farmer who had ever been told no. The town that once mocked him now depended on him. Because land is power, and Jamal Carter owned it all. They had laughed at him, mocked his dreams, told him he'd never own anything. But in the end, he owned everything.